Thank you, Jake. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here, and I want to thank all of you who have come here on a Saturday night, no less, right? Saturday night, right? Saturday night. It is Saturday night. It is Saturday night. It's one of those things where, Tuesday must be Belgium. I am particularly happy to be here at a spiritual center because in a place like this, you feel an invitation to go deeper, to be more real. And sometimes the space that you inhabit when having a conversation, the space not only in your mind but in your heart, determines where the conversation can go. I also want to point out that in the history of the United States and the history of social justice movements, religious and spiritual centers have been extremely important. In the abolitionist movement among white Americans, most of the abolitionist movement emerged from the early evangelical churches in New Hampshire. And among the women who were leaders of the women's suffragist movement, many of them were religious Quakers. And let's not forget that Martin Luther King Jr. was a Baptist preacher. And that is because it is a deep spiritual conviction, not just a political conviction, that we are beings of import, that people matter, that we are created beings. And that is what it says in our Declaration of Independence. It doesn't just say all men are equal. It says all men were created equal. It says that we are given by our Creator inalienable rights of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, which in today's terms I think would be self-actualization. The idea that you should be able to do whatever you want to do, be whoever you want to be, fly as high as your wings will take you, as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else. And then when it goes on to say that governments are instituted to secure those rights, that's a statement of divine purpose, really, that a worldly system is here to support that which is a creation. And it also says in the Declaration of Independence that if government's not doing that job, it is the right of the created beings to alter it or to abolish it. Now, I mention the Declaration of Independence because the Declaration of Independence is our mission statement. It's our vision board. It's our North Star. And when you don't revisit your mission statement, it loses its force. You know it, but it becomes less inscribed on your consciousness. In the Jewish religion, it says that every generation must rediscover God for itself. And as Americans, every generation of Americans needs to rediscover the meaning of our mission statement, the meaning of the Declaration of Independence for ourselves. If those principles that I just mentioned to you are inscribed on marble walls somewhere, if they're written on parchment and put underneath glass in Washington, and our kids, when they're in the 8th grade, we send them on a trip to Washington, D.C., and they see them in a museum, but they're not inscribed in our hearts, they lose their moral force. They have to be really imbibed, taken in. Each generation has to ask, what does that mean for me? And I think when we do that, we realize not only that those principles give us profound rights that are not inscribed in the founding of many nations, but also I think that those principles give us a profound sense of responsibility, that we are to protect those principles from assault, from any force, domestic or foreign. But also, I think it gives us a responsibility to seek to expand those principles into the lives of as many Americans as possible in our time. So it's a big deal, a kind of civic, sacred responsibility that we have to include our sense of who we are as a nation in the sense of who we are as individuals and what it means to live a meaningful life. When it comes to our individual lives, Americans go deep and we get real and we analyze. We're used to that. But when it comes to our collective conversation about our collective identity, and our collective behavior, which is what politics is. We've been trained to think like sixth graders. We've been trained to get a little dumb. We've been trained to just figure somebody else is handling those things. You know, experts in those matters. Now, that's never what this stuff was supposed to be about. Thomas Jefferson said that the only safe repository for power in the United States is in the hands of the people. But if you farm out your best thinking, if you farm out your own critical thinking, then you are acquiescing, you are surrendering your power. And you are surrendering to your power to people and forces that may or may not share with you the same ideas about what all this is supposed to be about. Now, metaphysically, you know, when you have a GPS in your car, you have a GPS in your car and it shows you the route. But then if you take a wrong turn, the GPS automatically recalibrates. That's true in our lives as well. It's true in our personal lives. There's something about the nature of the universe. You can talk about it in religious terms, spiritual terms, or secular terms. But sometimes we make a wrong turn. And then our lives recalibrate. And we atone for our mistakes and forgive other people for theirs. And we do the inner work of getting back on track. And then we're shown another way. Hopefully get to the same destination of a life in which we're as good as we can possibly be. Well, all that a nation is a group of people. So the same life principles that prevail within the life of an individual prevail within the life of a nation. And I submit to you tonight that just like sometimes as people we get off track, sometimes as people we look back and go, wow, I don't know what I was thinking, but I really went astray. And then you do the work and you recognize what you've done and you recognize, where do I need to atone? What's really going on here? What was I thinking? How did this happen? I have to look in the mirror. I have to clean up what I have to clean up. And you do that inner work, and then you get back on track, and you go forward. I submit to you that the United States is off track. I submit to you that the United States has swerved from our own moral core. We have swerved from the spiritual, the deeper political meaning. You know, Gandhi said that politics should be sacred. And by saying that, he didn't mean religious. He wasn't talking about religious dogma or doctrine. But he was talking about how politics should be something we come at from the deepest part of ourselves. No different than you do in church or synagogue or mosque or a therapist's office or an AA meeting, spiritual support group. That there should be a reverence. There should be depth in how we think about this. And there has not been depth. It's been a long time since American politics has had depth to it. And we have allowed that. We have allowed it. And when we think of our depth, we look at the shallowness of politics. We go, I don't even want anything to do with it. So we've walked away, and that hasn't made it go deeper. It's made it go more shallow. And many of us thought, fine, I don't even want to do anything with it. It's so toxic. And now, collectively, we're like, oh, my God, they're killing us. Oh, my God, people are dying because of this. Oh, my God, the planet's in trouble because of this. Oh, my God, 39% of Americans are skipping meals because they can't afford to pay their rent if they eat 3 meals a day. Oh, my God, half of our renters can't even afford their rent. There are carcinogens in our food. 68,000 people a year dying because of lack of health care. 18 million Americans who can't afford to pay for their prescriptions that the doctors give them. Millions of people who have the coverage to go to the doctor, but they don't necessarily have the coverage to pay for the pills. 18 million can't pay for the prescriptions that their doctors give them. They might have the coverage to go to the doctor, but they don't have the coverage to take the operation that the doctor wants them to have. They don't necessarily have the coverage to pay for the tests that the doctor wants them to have. Tens of millions of young people carrying thousands of dollars of college loan debt. And I want to ask those of you who are older, such as myself, please think of who you were when you were in your 20s. Could you have handled that? Could you have handled, when you were in your 20s, tens of thousands of dollars worth of college debt? No, first of all, we didn't have to, because they had tuition-free college and tech school. There were systems, University of Texas, Florida, California. And what did these kids do to deserve that? Try to better their lives. That's all they're trying to do, self-actualize, get an education, close the wage gap, become all that you can be. And coming out with these tens of thousands of dollars worth of college loan debt for no other reason than that lending companies and economic institutions and government forces will come together for the same reason that the reason people don't have insurance and universal health care like in every other advanced democracy is because of the greed of the insurance companies. 1.3 million people who are rationing their insulin just because of the greed of the pharmaceuticals. Guns flooding our streets because of the greed of gun manufacturers. Chemicals that are pesticides that we know harm a child's brain because of the greed of chemical companies. The horrors that have happened to American farming, our relationship with food, farmers themselves because of the greed of big agriculture, ramping up fossil fuel extraction when we know we need to be ramping it down because of the greed of big oil, and wars that have been fought in our lifetime that we know have more to do with profits for defense contractors than it had to do with righteous foreign policy. If we were individuals, a friend would say, you have got to stop. You've got to look at what you're doing. And if necessary, your friend would say, we're going to stage an intervention. We're going to stage an intervention because all of us know that if someone continues with immoderate behavior with drugs or alcohol, the body isn't guaranteed to survive if you go too far. And ladies and gentlemen and anyone else, our democracy isn't guaranteed to survive. Our species isn't guaranteed to survive. Our planet isn't guaranteed to survive if we don't wake up and begin acting like responsible human beings on this earth. It is my firm belief, not only from my career, I've had over 40 years of a career, so I've traveled this country a lot. And this is not only something that I feel based on the spiritual work that I've done, but also, now this is my second time running for president, I feel as strongly as ever, the American people are not the problem. We're ready. We've been through a lot. We have been through 9/11, we've been through COVID, we've been through Trump, we've been through a lot. And the American people are ready to regreen. The American people, this is the 21st century now. And if you look at any corner of our society, we're not stuck in old 20th century thinking. We're not stuck in an old mechanistic model. People are ready. We're thinking more holistically. We're thinking more whole person. We're thinking more integratively about everything, about every corner of our society. The problem is not the American people. That right there is very profound. Jefferson said that the only safe repository for power in the United States is in the hands of the people. And that's profound. That's radical. But what has happened is the power is not currently in the hands of the people. And I've already mentioned that in many ways, we allowed that to happen. It is in the hands of a matrix of corporate powers. Insurance, pharmaceutical, big ag, big chemical, big food, gun manufacturers, big oil, defense contractors. And the way this country works, and just like individuals, sometimes you have to look in the mirror and you have to be real grown up about it, and you need to be really brutally honest with yourself. The way this country works, their profits come before your safety, before your health, your well-being, before the safety, health, and well-being of your children, before the safety, health, and well-being of your animals, of your planet, and of your great-grandchildren. And that system is now the status quo of how America operates. Now you think, oh my goodness, well, shouldn't the government protect us from that? Let me tell you how that works. The way that works is that particularly since the Citizens United Supreme Court decision 14 years ago, those corporate powers have unlimited permission to so influence our politicians in Washington that now in policy after policy, our own elected representatives who are elected by you to represent your best interests, and yet over and over and over again, they represent the financial well-being of their donors before they serve the safety, health, and well-being, even when fully expressed by you. That is the new status quo. That is a new status quo. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you something else. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. You know, I read an article about myself years ago, but I remember chuckling when I read it, and I think it applies to my career at this point as much as it ever did. This article said, Marianne Williamson doesn't say anything everybody else isn't saying. She just says it when the microphone is on. And that's what I would say about everything we're talking about here tonight. I haven't told you one thing you don't already know. Maybe I told a specific or two. But what's happening is that the American people are concerned on both the left and the right. We get some things off. And for those of us who are old enough, we remember this very far gone, long ago and far away land. If there's anyone young here, I want to describe this fairy tale to you. It must seem like a fairy tale to you. To others of us, it's like, yeah, we remember that. And those of you who are young might be thinking, well, intellectually I know it's true, but I can't even imagine it. So I'm going to remind those of us who were there and make sure that everybody who was not yet born, what it was like. It was called the 1970s. The average American couple could afford a house. The average American couple could afford a car. The average American couple could afford a yearly vacation. The average American couple could afford for one parent to stay home with the kids if they wanted to. One salary, one job could support a family of 4. And that couple could afford to send their kids to college. It was called a thriving middle class. You can't have a thriving democracy when you don't have a thriving middle class. Money has to circulate. Economic opportunity has to circulate in a society no differently than blood has to circulate in the body. You can't have all the blood in your body in one arm. That would be a very sick body indeed. And yet what has happened over the last 50 years is that there's been a $50 trillion transfer of wealth into the hands of 1% of Americans. Something has gone really wrong. Something has gone really wrong because an economic paradigm has taken us hostage. Now, at the very beginning, remember when I mentioned the Declaration of Independence? Let's talk about what happened when that was signed. 56 very brave men signed it. And I say that they were very brave because if they had, if the British had won the war, they would have all been executed as traitors. The fact that they signed that document burst into reality, burst into the ethers of political and spiritual possibility. The idea that anybody should be able to thrive. No nation had ever before been founded on that notion. That's where something profoundly enlightened occurred on the planet. But it's also, in terms of the history of the United States, where things were very gnarly. Because out of the 56 signers, 41 of them were slave owners. Now, what does that say about us? It says that the American mind, it's built into the DNA. We're both and. We've always been both and. In every generation, we have had a reiteration of this struggle between forces of people who really get how big this is. People who have been willing to stand for it, to struggle for it, to sacrifice for it, even to die for it. But there have also been, throughout our history, from the very beginning, those slave owners at the very beginning, all the way unto now, people who for their own ideological and or financial purposes had no intention whatsoever of actualizing those principles. And that struggle between the two has been played out in generation after generation. That's our story. Just like you go to therapy and you learn about your family and you learn about your history, because you know more about yourself when you know where you and your people came from. We as Americans now need to know, where did we come from? I know there's a lot of talk about who's Christian, who's Jewish, who's Muslim, who's Hindu, who's gay, who's straight, who's male, who's female, who's neither, who's Latino, who's white, who's black, who's brown. And those conversations are important. And I'm not saying anything to minimize them, but there are times in a political conversation where we need to come out of our silos. We need to have now an American conversation. And that includes generations too. Enough with who's boomer and who's Z and who's X and who's millennial. Whether you're 18 or you are 80, you are the generation of adult Americans at this time. And we who are adult Americans really need to talk. And that's what we're talking about here. So how did our generations, other generations, handle this struggle? Well, if you look at how they handled it, you're very, very impressed. Because a generation rose up and repudiated slavery. Slavery is certainly an assault on the notion of all men are created equal. Abraham Lincoln said that the Declaration of Independence was the moral basis of the Civil War. He said that the Declaration of Independence is an eternal rebuke against all systems of injustice and oppression. Other generations rose up, they abolished slavery with a constitutional amendment and a civil war. In the face of the institutional suppression of women, a generation rose up with the women's suffrage movement and passed the 19th Amendment. A generation rose up when the Gilded Age held all the money in the hands of a few the first time and established organized labor. And in the face of segregation and in the institutionalized suppression of black people in the American South, a generation rose up with the Civil Rights Movement. They dismantled segregation. They passed the Civil Rights Act. They passed the Voting Rights Act. Americans are geared to do big things. In fact, we're like wilted flowers when we're not asked to do big things. So other generations push back against institutionalized forms of suppression, institutionalized forms of oppression. Now, anybody here, I bet you've had the conversations about toxic relationships, how you wouldn't take abuse, how you needed to set a boundary, right? What more abuse could you be taking than that your food is so filled with carcinogens that are not allowed in Canada or any other advanced democracy? What more abuse could you be taking than that you don't have universal health care when in fact they have it in every other advanced democracy, plus a majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want it. And a majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want tuition-free college and tech school. Isn't it just a little bit abusive that we have been trained to expect so little in this country? So I think that other generations have risen up, and when they've seen institutional forms of behavior, activity, and even governmental action by which people were held back from being all that they could be, other generations rose up. Other generations rose to the challenge. They rose to the moment. They said, no, we're not doing that anymore. We're not doing that anymore. Yeah, we had slavery. We're not going to do that anymore. Yeah, we had institutionalized oppression of women. We're not going to do that anymore. Yeah, we had a Gilded Age, but we're not going to do that anymore. And yeah, we had segregation, but guess what? We're not going to do that anymore. I've been running for president for the last year because I think it's our turn now. I mentioned before about an intervention. Drugs and alcohol. Most of us have had those experiences of somebody calling us, or maybe we were the ones who made the call. Somebody that we love, we've seen it. Somebody says to you, did you see her drive off with the kids in the car? She was completely drunk. Or did you see him fall down the stairs the other day? He's out of his mind. Do you think we ought to do something? And everybody says to each other, yeah, I think we probably should. Do you know an interventionist? And you do what you can. And most of us have had friends or loved ones who have thanked us a lot after they were in rehab, knowing that perhaps we helped save their lives. And we've also had friends and loved ones who didn't make it. It's our turn to intervene. America having swerved so far away from the principles of the Declaration of Independence that our government, instead of protecting us from forces which put their short-term profits before our well-being, Our government has become its enablers. And that's the new status quo. And that status quo will not disrupt itself. The only thing that will disrupt it now is if we, the people, step in. Now, Abraham Lincoln, standing on the battlefield at Gettysburg, he said that the men who had died for the North there, and with that battle, it was decided, that was the battle after which it was clear that the North would be winning the war. So he went to the battlefield, he gave the Gettysburg Address, and in speaking about the men who died for the North there, he said that they had given their last full measure of devotion, so that a government of the people and by the people and for the people would not perish from the earth. It's perishing now. We're not functioning as a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. That's what you do in an intervention. Honey, we all see it. That's what you say to somebody. We all see it. You need to see this. You need to see this. And we need to see this about our country. We're not functioning as a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. We are functioning as a government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations. That matrix of corporate powers is no different than the landed gentry in Old England. We rejected that, and we need to reject this. It is a form of economic tyranny. When you have 39% of the people in your country regularly skipping meals to pay their rents, when you have a majority of people living paycheck to paycheck, a majority of people who could not afford to absorb a $1,000 unexpected expenditure, when you have 70% of Americans saying that they live with chronic economic anxiety, then we call it a mental health crisis. But I go back to those of us who are older, remembering who you were in your 20s. If you were going to school and carrying tens of thousands of dollars worth of college loan debt, wouldn't you be a little anxious and depressed? How dare they call it a mental health crisis? That displaces it. It is every bit as much an economic justice crisis. The majority of Americans have no wiggle room. They're economically locked into where they are. And the problem isn't that some people can get very rich in America. That's a good thing. Not every rich person is a greedy bastard. The problem isn't that some people can get rich in America. The problem is that not nearly enough people right now ever get a chance at that. You can't have a diminished middle class and have a thriving democracy. You have 20% of America's top earners doing fine, but those of us who are in that top 20% are living on some kind of an enchanted island, and it's surrounded by a vast sea of economic despair. And large groups of desperate people, historically, should be seen as a national security risk. When you have large groups of desperate people, that becomes a petri dish out of which emerges all manner of personal and societal dysfunction, including ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces. We have hate groups. We have Nazis around again. We have groups that are like, what's going on in this country? Now, it's not like when I was growing up, we didn't have people who hated, people who are homophobes, people who are anti-Semites, people who were racist. I mean, it's not like we've ever been a perfect country in any way, shape, or form. But I think it's fair to say that when I was growing up, there was at least a sense in this country that we were supposed to try to be good. And there was a sense that there were some kind of guardrails. And you certainly knew that there was no major political party that was going to be giving any real megaphone to such people as that. Those guardrails have fallen. The guardrails of decency have fallen. They've fallen in large part because of social media, and they've fallen in large part because of malignant political characters who were not above stoking those forces for their own political purposes. And so what we need to do now is turn around. We need to stop thinking that if we just continue like this, it will get better of itself, because it won't. And we need to do more than just win one election. We need to have a regreening. We need to have a new chapter of American history. We need to cut the cord with an entire aberrational chapter that has gone on for 50 years now, by which an economic paradigm, not a specific institution, but the very idea that somehow corporate profits are more important than you are. We need to cut the cord with that. And if the government won't do it, we need to do it. And hello, theoretically, we're supposed to be represented by the government. But even that has gone wrong. And I'm speaking to you from the belly of that beast. Because that government now is so held hostage by a political media industrial complex that thinks it has the right to curate for you who the candidates are. So candidate suppression is a form of voter suppression. And that's not the way this was supposed to work. George Washington, in his farewell address, said that he feared that political parties would form factions of men more loyal to their party than to their country. John Adams said he saw political parties as a threat to democracy. Well, we have major political parties. When I was growing up, though, they both had a soul. You know, Eisenhower said that the American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative. There are high-minded conservative principles and high-minded liberal principles. But today, corporatist principles prevail. To such an extent, if you're a Republican, get the soul of your party back. If you're a Democrat, we must get the soul of the party back. And throughout our history, third parties have been important. The Abolitionist Party, abolition came from the Abolitionist Party. Women's suffrage came from the Women's Party. Social Security came from the Socialist Party. Today, the two parties have formed, ever since the 1960s, a kind of unholy alliance, making it very difficult for anyone but them to basically control the show. Now, if they're doing it righteously, that's okay. If they're standing in back and allowing you, the voters, to decide who the nominees, for instance, will be, and then they come forward, now they're coming up with canards like, oh, we have an incumbent, so because we have an incumbent, we're not going to have a primary. Well, some of us are old enough to remember when Lyndon Johnson was the incumbent. Eugene McCarthy primaried him. Bobby Kennedy Sr. primaried him. People primary sitting incumbent senators all the time. People primary incumbent congresspeople all the time. It's not weird. It's democracy. That's all that it is. But what we have now is people just, like I said, farming out our own best thinking. So I've told you now my analysis of the problem. And I want to tell you my analysis of what we need to do about it. Now, before I do this, I want to make it clear. Joe Biden has already won the Democratic nomination. I'm not delusional. I get that. So you might ask, why are you here? And I'm here because you have a primary. You have an election on Tuesday. For those of you who have not yet voted, I am requesting that you consider voting for me, and I'll tell you why. Because I believe, and I'm speaking as someone, and there might be people in this room who do not agree with us, but my conversation on this point is with those of you, whether you are independents, whether you are Democrats, or whether you are Republicans, who do not wish to see Donald Trump back in the White House. I am one of those who believe that he does represent a neo-fascist threat. Now, many people have said to me, Marianne, why are you doing this? Don't you understand there's a fascist at the door? I want to be very clear. I'm doing this because there's a fascist at the door. And I agree with Franklin Roosevelt, who said that we would not have to worry about a fascist takeover in this country as long as democracy delivers on its promises. But democracy has not been delivering on its promises. Fascism should never have gotten so close to the door. And if democracy had been delivering on its promises, it wouldn't have. And so what I am seeing as the sustainable option for our democracy, for our country, and for more than that, is an economic bill of rights that includes universal health care, Medicare for all, using the Higher Education Act to completely eliminate those college loans so that these kids can get in the game, tuition-free college and tech school, which they have in every other country, subsidized child care, which is just strangling couples all throughout this country. Paid family leave, guaranteed sick pay, guaranteed jobs, and guaranteed living wage. And I want to point out that everything I just said is considered a moderate position in every other advanced democracy. We've just been trained to expect so little. We've so normalized a kind of, all right, well, I go to work. I may or may not like the job, but I'm here because it's the only place where I can go for the benefits and all of the other attending consequences of life lived in ways that absolutely do not express the ability to thrive that should be given to every citizen of a country as rich as ours. We should have a Department of Children and Youth because our children are at risk. I've met principals at elementary schools all over this country who tell me they have little elementary school children on suicide watch. In public schools throughout our country, we have trauma rooms. We're bleeding teachers because this is not, we have teachers who have to work jobs in addition to being a teacher. We have teachers who have to pay in order to have enough school supplies in their classrooms. We have children throughout this country who go to schools where there aren't even the resources to teach them how to read. And if a child cannot learn to read by the age of 10, their chances of high school graduation are drastically reduced, and their chances of incarceration are drastically increased. And speaking of incarceration, when I was a young woman, there were 300,000 people incarcerated in the United States. Today, there are 2.3 million. In 1971, Richard Nixon initiated the drug war, saying that drugs were public enemy number one. He knew it wasn't true. He did it in large part as an attack on black communities. Black and white Americans use drugs at about roughly the same rate, but you don't see policemen raiding white neighborhoods to see if anybody's using drugs here. Meanwhile, 46% of all our federal prisoners are nonviolent drug offenders. So the war on drug completely feeds the prison industrial complex. We spent $1 trillion on it. We're still spending $100 billion a year. For a fraction of that, we could have a world-class network of fully funded drug recovery options. We should treat drug addiction the way they do in nations like Portugal, where they treat it as a health issue, not a criminal issue. I wouldn't want a drug czar. I'd want a recovery czar. We have to change the language. We have to change the paradigm. We have to start over. We have to pull our collective behavior and our collective thinking out of the 20th century. We know that we need to ramp down rather than ramp up fossil fuel extraction, but we're at a point where no matter whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, those guys are in line with big oil. And we need to learn to wage peace. Just like we have war games, we need to have peace games. Just like we have a military academy, we should have a peace academy. Just like we have armies of military personnel, we should have armies of peace builders. Peace builders are a real thing. There are 4 factors which, when present in any situation, whether it's a corner of an American city or another part of the world, these 4 factors specifically indicate that when present, there will be a higher level of peace and a lower level of violence. Number 1, greater economic opportunities for women. Number 2, greater educational opportunities for children. Number 3, a reduction of violence against women. And number 4, the amelioration of unnecessary human despair. We need to think of a world without war in 100 years and reverse engineer from there. I agree with JFK. If we do not get rid of war, war will get rid of mankind. And for those people who would say, oh, Williamson, she's so kooky, she's so naive. Let me tell you what's naive. What's naive is assuming that we can rationally expect for there to be a human race on this planet in another 100 years if we don't at least try. We have to change. It's not even an issue. You know, the Course in Miracles says, it's not up to you whether you learn what you learn. It's merely up to you whether you learn through joy or through pain. There's too much tension in this country. There's too much anxiety under the surface. This thing is going to blow. Unlike our major politicians, I travel this country. I'm on the ground. I see what's happening. Something's going to fall one direction or the other. It's either going to fall in the direction of what Abraham Lincoln would call a rebirth of freedom, greater democracy, a rededication to what's possible, to a sustainable future, to greater love, to greater compassion, to greater mercy. Or we're going to fall in a direction that could be authoritarian, could be chaotic, and could even be a chapter of neo-fascism. I have a friend. She was born in Lebanon and raised in Norway. And she's a very successful documentarian. And she makes these documentaries that have won many awards about very, very serious subjects, things going on around the world. And she was telling me that she was once at some very high-level conference, many world leaders. And because she's highly respected in her field, she gets to talk to these people. And she told me about an experience she had that surprised her. It surprised me too, and it might surprise you. She was asking many world leaders that come from democracies all over the planet, what scares you most? What really scares you the most? What is it that keeps you up at night? She was thinking, are they going to say the environment? Were they going to say nuclear energy? What were they going to say? AI. She said, what is it that really keeps you up at night? And she told me, Marianne, almost all of them had the same answer. And this was the answer. What will we do if America goes down? This is very important. We hold in our hands something so important, and we need to take it back. But we can't take it back until first we take it back in our thinking and in our hearts. That's the only way to take it back into our hands. Now, I'm not going to win the Democratic nomination. The president has already done that. But I don't even believe that we will be able to defeat Donald Trump if our only agenda is be scared, be very scared. We won't even be able to defeat Donald Trump if we're just telling people that the economy is doing well, when for 80% of them, that is not their visceral experience. We need to offer people Medicare for all. We need to offer people tuition-free college and tech school. We need to offer people fundamental change in the material conditions that bind them. We need to offer the American people something that will actually be a promise of making their lives better. Otherwise, I'm not afraid too many of them will vote for Donald Trump. I'm afraid that too many will stay home. And for those of you who are Democrats, hello. Democratic Party is bleeding voters. It is bleeding young voters. It is bleeding black voters. It is bleeding Asian voters. It is bleeding Latino voters. And we cannot heal, whether you're a political party, a system, an individual, or a nation, if you're willing to just walk away in a trance of denial, thinking, well, my life isn't working, but maybe if I do it another time, it'll work next time. We need a real change in this country. We need a real break in the past, with the past. If you vote for me on Tuesday, what is my hope? My hope is that I can continue to get votes in in the primary states that are left, and that I could possibly get enough in some state to get delegates that would take me to the convention. And what I promise you, if you help me get to the convention, if you will vote for me on Tuesday, if you will spend the time to talk to your friends, to wear my button, to take a yard sign, to have a bumper sticker on your car, to donate if you can, to do what you can to push this forward, my promise to you is this. If I get a chance to have a voice in this situation, I will use my voice. I will not shut up. I will inconvenience so many of those people that really do deserve to be inconvenienced. And I will speak. I will speak for those in this country who have no voice. And I will speak for those who are hungry, who they are ignoring. And I will speak for suffering children who they are ignoring. And I will speak for the earth, who they are pretending to care about because of all their green energy investments, when the truth of the matter is they're doing more dirty investments than they are doing clean investments. And I will speak about our need for a just transition from a dirty economy to a clean economy, from a war economy to a peace economy, for a new chapter in American history, for the fact that the American people are not being served the way people should be served in a country such as ours. The way it's not okay to suppress candidates any more than it's okay to suppress votes. We need to wake up and we need to rise up. And we need to we need to come out of our silos. I already told that. But we also need to toughen up. I don't want to hear anybody say, oh, but it's so traumatizing. You think the people walking across the bridge at Selma were not traumatized? You think the women who were thrown into jail for marching for suffrage and the conditions in the prison were so bad that they went on a hunger strike, and then the response of the prison officials was to send men into their cells to force onto their necks these metal contraptions in order to force feed them? Hey, don't you think they had some anxiety? We got to grow up, we got to rise up, we got to toughen up. My personal motto is you pray in the morning and then you kick ass in the afternoon. It's our time, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else. Arizona, you have a lot of power this Tuesday. You have a lot of power despite it all. Don't let them think, well, he's got it sewn up, so why don't you just stay home? There's really nothing for you to do except say, oh, okay, it wasn't fair what went down here. It wasn't fair. It's not okay to knock people off ballots. It's not okay for the CNN and MSNBC to just act as shills for the Democratic Party and not even ever have on a FEC registered qualified candidate for president. They would have you think the only person who's qualified is someone qualified to perpetuate the system as it is. They would have you think that I'm an unserious candidate, and I'm telling you, they say that because they know how serious I am. They would have you think somebody has to have been one of them. And I would remind you that the Constitution of the United States says that in order to be president, you have to be 35 or older, you have to have lived here for 14 years, and you have to have been born here. It does not say you have to have been a governor or a senator or a congressperson. It doesn't say you have to be a political car mechanic. The problem is not that we don't have enough political car mechanics in Washington. The problem is that we're on the wrong road. We don't need another technocrat, we need a visionary. And I'm not the greatest visionary in the United States, but I am the only one running for the Democratic nomination for President of the United States. And that is why I am continuing to speak. That is why I am continuing to campaign. That is why where I'm on a ballot, I'm going there. For those of you who might have donated to my campaign, that's what you paid for, to be part of the process, which is obscenely expensive. And the way the system is now rigged, only those with huge amounts of money can get anywhere near the pinnacles of power. It's not okay. And what's important is that we not acquiesce to this, that we not be quiet. Martin Luther King said, your life begins to end on the day you stop talking about the things that matter. I'm here because I believe that what we're talking about tonight really matters. And I'm so grateful to you because in a room like this, there's the permission, there's the listening to go deep. We're no worse than any other generation. We're no worse than the people in any other country. We do have what it takes. But we don't need more analysis of the data. We don't need more data, but we do need some courage. Please join with me. Let's have some. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.